Hello, friends, and welcome to Service of Change's Changecast, your podcast for change. I'm your host, Dennis Snappy II, with Service of Change, where small changes among the masses can have a massive impact around the world. Tonight, author Ray Davis, Anunnaki Awakening, his new book, and a great backstory behind it and some ancient history that you may have never heard about that may change your view of the entire world. I promise you, this is going to be a fantastically exciting show, and it's going to give you something to talk about tomorrow and after you listen to it. But before we get into that, let me bring on my talented co-host, the provocateur of Facebook and social media, Joel, the provocateur Schaefer. What's going on tonight, Joel?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm really excited about this show. I connected with Ray. I want to say a month and a half ago when I saw him promoting his book, and he was, agreed to come on the show. And I'm really excited to talk about this subject tonight. So I'm in a really good mood tonight.
Good, good. Yeah, some of the stuff that I saw, I listened to a lot of similar stuff, and especially recently I've been listening. So I think we're going to have a lot to talk about.
Definitely. I'm fired up. I was listening to a bunch of different podcasts today within this general subject, talking about UFOs and stuff. And I listened to an interview by Carla Turner. I'm not sure if you're familiar who she is, but man, powerful stuff. And she, a lot of the stuff she talked about is very similar to some of the stuff I'm claiming in I Am Human, which I'm really excited. That book's coming out tomorrow. It's been a great project to work on. So tomorrow, 3/27 is the day that I'm dropping my new book, where our readers can actually read that for free if they just go subscribe to our free newsletter at serviceofchange.com.
Nice.
So yeah, that's something to look forward to, and I'll have some stuff going up online tomorrow, and depending on how the show goes tonight, maybe I'll get into it a little bit more at the end of the night. But I'm more focused on our new friend Ray, who's going to be talking about his book in just a minute. Before we jump into that, anything exciting in your world worth sharing, Joel? Or
there's two new animal arrivals in the Schaefer-Kirksey household this week.
Uh-oh. What do we have?
We rescued a skinny little cat about a year ago in the depths of last winter, and I inherited a cat from my ex who passed away named Buka, and I thought Buka was fixed.
It sounds like you thought wrong.
I thought wrong, so Buka and the new cat Sammy, who I named after my ex, they made sweet love, and now there's two little kittens. Thank God there's only two kittens.
Yeah, you're lucky, man. Well, congratulations on the kittens in your house now. But wow, okay, that's a lot. That's double your animals in the house. Well, plus the dog, right?
Yeah, so we're a zoo. But the good thing is that there's these generous people from around here originally, I think, who donate every so often, or every so often there's this campaign that they've helped fund down at this place I think it's called Pause. It's in Sharon Hill, and we're going to get Buka fixed for free, thanks to these generous people, because there's a problem with cats in this neighborhood not being fixed. That's why I felt really guilty that we didn't take care of this. Right. Because I don't want to, I would much rather have some other cats who need a home be rehomed than my two kittens. But now that it's happened, we're going to try to find some people who the gift of this life of these kittens, the lives of these kittens, maybe will brighten their lives. Yeah. The way that these animals have brightened me and my... I could do a whole show. We kind of did one show about it. I think I shared a little bit about these animals have changed my life in so many amazing ways. So
and that's a powerful thing. And maybe reach out to the people that are helping out with this, and maybe they want to be guests on the show for all the good work.
I didn't think of that.
That's perfect. I'm always thinking.
Great takeaway. I didn't think of that. But
awesome. Well, look, let me get to our guest, because I know we have a lot to say tonight, and I want to give him as much time to talk about his book and some other stuff that we're going to get into. So I have his bio up on the screen. I don't know if you can read it through the Google Hangout, but I'm going to go ahead and read his bio for our listeners. And his name is Ray Davis. It says, Ray Davis lives in Lewisburg, Kansas, with his wonderful wife, April. They enjoy traveling, especially to their favorite spot on Earth, Hawaii. I can't wait to go there someday. He's a writer, thinker, and speaker committed to helping people shift paradigms, listen to me reading terribly, in ways that better their lives and better the planet. Ray's journey in personal development began after he nearly died at 25. Seeking a better way, he studied personal development and the world's various spiritual traditions for the insight they could provide. In 2007, he found the affirmation spot and was once dubbed the affirmation king of Twitter by another motivational teacher. To this day, he still inspires more than 60,000 followers every day through a variety of niche Twitter accounts. In 2010, Ray released an ebook titled The Power to Be You. The book contains 447 original daily quotes and affirmations. Ray says, "I've tasted defeat and I've tasted victory. I believe those experiences gave me insight into how we can individually and collectively create a happier, more successful world. Every person on this planet deserves the opportunity to live his or her highest potential. We're not there. Many of our current institutions work directly against human beings achieving that goal." Author Graham Hancock said, "We are a species with amnesia." I'm 100% agreement with that assessment. In the absence of understanding about our origins and destiny, we have substituted dysfunctional paradigms. Until we wipe the sleep from our eyes and see the world anew, we will continue the cycle of want, war, top-down control that plagues our planet today. And tonight he's going to come on and talk about his book, Anunnaki Awakening. It's a fascinating subject if you're not familiar with it. Let me make sure his mic is up. Ray, are you with us?
I'm here, Dennis. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, sir?
Doing awesome. Thank you.
So happy to have you on the show. What a great bio you have, man. It sounds like, let me jump back to that. I want to get into your book, but let me jump back to that a minute. It says you almost died at 25?
Yeah, I was diagnosed with a very unusual disease that I still deal with on a daily basis, but it's a manageable type of situation. But they didn't know what was wrong with me, and I wound up in the hospital and nearly died. So.
And that kind of set you on this path that you're on right now.
Yeah, it did. I think from an early age, I was always intrigued by who we are and why we're here and how we got here, but I think at that moment, that really put me on the path of really looking at life differently than I think most people that age typically do. So,
what changed? What stance did you take on life from that point forward?
Well, I wanted to know all the different ways that the people around the world saw our existence. I think I was prior to that was very provincial in my views of things, and kind of took what had been given to me by the people around me, and at that point in time, when you almost die, you kind of question everything, and you wanted to, basically go around and see what other people thought. And so I read voraciously. Started with Joseph Campbell and got into, all the different spiritual traditions and read their books and really tried to understand and kind of homogenize a view for myself on why we're here and what this is all about.
I understand that journey all too well. That's kind of the context of my project that's coming out tomorrow. I Am Human. I've had those same questions, and I did that same thing. I looked at the world around us and what do other people believe, and that caused me to question my beliefs. I used to say, well, does a tribal person on some remote island that's never been exposed to my way of life, are they wrong because they've never had an opportunity? And I just went down that line of thought and exploration and turned to my own studies and my own reading. So I think that's a fascinating journey, and just looking at, based on my research, what drew me into contacting you was just the title of your book. I know that's in certain circles that's a hot subject, and you and I spoke earlier. We're hoping that more people are going to take an interest in this topic as well. So before we jump to that, though, you did the affirmations through Twitter. How long has that been going on?
I've been doing that since about 2007. And
these are just positive tweets that you're sending out every day, or?
Yeah. So I have a Twitter feed called the Affirmation Spot, and I started on that one and grew quite a following, and then I developed a number of other niche Twitter feeds that kind of around some interests I have, like Hawaii and some other things that I'm really interested in, and kind of developed niche followings in all of those, but always kind of focused on this positive motivational type of message along with the other content. So that's about 60,000 followers on Twitter.
Now, where do you get your inspiration, your ideas to post each day?
Daily life, a lot. At one point in time, I sat down and wrote a lot of these things for myself. After I came out of that situation back when I was 25, and for the next several years, I kind of bounced around for a while, and I found that affirmations and positive thinking and really trying to train my mind really helped me kind of get a grip on my life and move forward. So it had always been my goal for a long time to start a site that would offer some sort of audio affirmations, because that's what I used to use myself. I like to listen to them. I would put them on when I went to bed at night and that kind of thing. And so I started the affirmation spot and just kind of grew from there. And it's really just turned into a lot of fun now, because it's just amazing the people all over the world that will contact you by email and say, something you did really impacted me today, and that really makes you feel good.
That's fantastic. It reminds me of a couple things that we have going on within our community. I mean, Lori, that's how her book started. She would do an inspirational haiku for change every Tuesday for us, and that is what eventually resulted in her book. And we were doing thoughts for change every day over the summer when I wasn't teaching. We were putting out very similar positive messages. And my brother does nappy words. He has nappy music. He's Mike Nappy, the musician, through Twitter and stuff. And he's been doing this for about 2 years, and he gets that same feedback that you're getting. Now, hey, your words motivated me today. It changed my mood in the morning. So there's a lot. I've seen direct results from stuff that you do, and other people out there putting that positive message out there, and it really has an impact, I think, on people. I think
people get it. There's a lot of people out there. I mean, they mean well. They want to do well for themselves. They want a good life, but they're just bombarded with so much negativity, and I'm a big believer that you have to counter that, because any one of us, no matter how long we've been doing this, I mean, I think human beings seem to have, by and large, kind of a negative default setting, and we have to overcome that a little bit. And
we do.
To fall into what the media and the other other institutions around us are saying, and a lot of it's very negative, and we have to find a way to kind of combat that.
Right, because it kills our self-esteem and even our will to try at that point. And Greg Braden does a lot of talking about such a small number of people in comparison to the population of the world are needed to have that mindset of positivity to change everybody around them. You can have that influence. He had some research from the University of Heart Math or Heart Science, has actually done scientific studies to show when people have that positive vibe, it has a real physical impact on their surrounding environment. So I commend you for your efforts, and I hope more people catch on to that and start spreading that positivity instead of that negative stuff. Because we talked earlier, there's too much of the fear and the negativity that's being shoved down everybody's throats. So we need more of this positive stuff coming out there, Rick. Definitely.
Absolutely.
So let's get into Anunnaki Awakening. You sent me the book. It's a beautiful book, man. It's well put together for one, and then just I scanned through. I'm a very slow reader, so I definitely haven't read the whole thing yet. I've only had it for about a week, but scanning through and just looking at the titles of the chapter, I can't wait to read every chapter. And I read the first. I did read the first chapter, and if you don't mind, can I give the title of the first chapter?
Absolutely.
It's called Operation Original Sin. Now that really catches my attention, because that's a subject, through my spiritual studies and then what turns into studies of ancient history and origins and things of that nature. That's a heated topic of what is original sin and what does it mean and why is that affecting me, So to open your book like that, and it's a pretty neat military operation that you talk about, and it just ties into a lot of stuff that it's obvious. I mean, it's not obvious it's a work of fiction when you look at the title and stuff, but it's obvious that you're well researched into a fictional work that probably has some real history behind it. Am I right in saying that?
It is. It's definitely fictional. I kind of took creative license with some of the Anunnaki and the relationships. So someone who's kind of really studied the Anunnaki and is a purist might say, well, they aren't really related that way. But I kind of use the characters fictionally in that way. But yeah, the idea is that basically kind of building on what the Zecharia Sitchin, Von Daniken, some of these folks have done over time, and this idea of there was an intervention at some point in our past by beings that our ancestors referred to as gods, but that we might refer to today as extraterrestrials who intervene in our planet, and so and in our species. And so that's kind of what the book is based on, that premise, but it kind of goes beyond, I kind of joke with people that Ancient Aliens says, what if it were all true? What if it all happened back then? I say, well, what if it's all true and it's still happening today? and that's kind of what this book is about. So
That's very very intriguing. And when you start thinking about that, when I first started hearing that stuff, it shocked me, that whole concept. But it's not that far fetched. I mean, somebody has said it's not that different, from comparing a mythical god that lives up in the sky, because technically he's not from Earth either. So by definition, that would make God an extraterrestrial too, correct?
yeah, that's true. I think one of the distinctions I try to draw in this book a little bit, though, is that there's a separation between kind of what humanity has accepted as God or gods, and maybe a being that might be behind the entire operation, so to speak. We've got this vision kind of angry gods that demand our tribute. One, which is really interesting. Why would the God of the universe need to have us giving money or sheep or whatever?
Right.
And the second piece of that is demands our worship and our obedience. And again, why would the being that created this entire universe need human beings to behave that way towards him? It really sounds like kind of an egoic being, almost kind of someone you wouldn't let your kids hang out with.
Yeah, and those questions, and I know a lot of people that have gone down this road have had similar questions, and that has always bothered me as well, is that you have to be fearful. And this isn't all religion, this is just certain teachings and certain aspects and sects of things. And surely I welcome comments and feedback from readers that may disagree with what we're saying, because we're really trying to learn and understand things. So if you have information contrary to what we're saying, please hit me up on Twitter, Dennis Nappy II, NAPPIII. Going to work that plug in there. But it really got me thinking of if you're all powerful, then why do you demand this stuff? Why do you punish us? Why all these thoughts would go through my head, and so I'm glad to see that you're taking this approach and kind of putting it out there in this book to hopefully generate a more of a discussion on it. And the fact that you took that creative license, Whitley Strieber just well, not just, but I listened to an old podcast from one of his Dreamland shows, and he was talking about how sometimes he will write a fictional book because of that creative license. It allows him to express a concept without being held down to the strict guidelines required for a nonfiction work, because you got to be on your P's and Q's when you're writing that nonfiction piece. But when you go fiction, you can have a little bit more fun with it, a little bit more play, and you don't have to worry too much about being accurate and people calling you on facts. Is that what you found, Ray?
Well, yeah, and that was absolutely why I wrote this as a fiction book. I've been studying this topic and been interested in it most of my life. This really started for me. My dad took me to see Chariot of the Gods in its original theater release, and this is going to date me a little bit, when I was 7 years old, back in 1971. Right. And I was hooked from the beginning, and then I kind of lost touch with it for a number of years. And honestly, this book started out to be a work of motivational fiction around the idea of human beings taking more responsibility for their future and changing the destiny of our species. And as I was writing it, these two characters, Maria Love and Nana, kind of appeared to me, and at the same time I was kind of getting back into these kind of topics, and I thought, I want to merge all this together, because I think there's something to this idea of we really can't fix our future until we understand our past. And this isn't about dismissing anyone's ideas or beliefs. I don't want anyone to think that, but it's really about asking some honest questions about our past, and not just accepting, a prepackaged set of ideas that either religion or science provides us, because science has kind of become the same way. They think they have figured out, how we got here. It was kind of all a big accident, and
right.
and there's not really any meaning behind it except for the next, evolutionary change, and I think that's all pieces of it, but I don't think that's the whole puzzle. And I think we just need to be free to ask these big questions and dialogue about them respectfully, without attacking anyone. And I feel like we're reaching a point with our species where we really have to try to get rid of that amnesia that Graham Hancock talks about. That lack of awareness of our true past.
Yeah, I think it's Tom Campbell who says belief locks you in. It hinders you. It prevents you from looking beyond that, beyond what your current belief structure is. And you have to be able to collapse that, or at least willing to challenge your own belief systems. And if your faith is strong enough, it'll stand up to some of the questions you have. But you know, I've heard some people saying, well, that goes against my religion, but that doesn't mean it's bad. You know, that may go against your belief system, but what if there's a better way, is what I always say. It doesn't make your religion bad, but what if there's a better way that can help more people? And I think we need to be willing to at least explore that possibility. And unfortunately, a lot of people just want to keep it my way or the highway. You know.
Well, and you know, I found over time that a lot of people have never challenged their own beliefs. They've never questioned it. You know, they kind of were given a set of beliefs, and they bought into them, but they never really went back and said, you know, is that really right? You know, and I think that's really hard because you know, in this environment we see things going on around the world, you know, with ISIS and things like that, and it's just like there's a lot of anger around this idea that we're right and everyone else is wrong, and it's just not. To me, it's kind of a product of this lack of awareness of what the actual truth is, because you know, someone said that the fewer the facts, the stronger the belief, you know, and I think that's kind of you know, what we're seeing manifesting in our world. And I think to ask these questions honestly and be able to dialogue about them and try to understand what the truth is about our past is really important for us as a species on this planet to move forward.
Why do you think there's so much anger and negativity, Ray? People bring that stuff up. What do you think is causing that?
You know, I think we were talking, you know, before the show a little bit about. I've really come to believe, and I think there's a few people out there who are an exception to this, but I think by and large, we as human beings kind of have a default negative setting that we have to overcome, and then I think there's a lot of negativity out there in the environment, be it media, be it the institutions that we're talking about, you know, some of them that really, you know, are always telling you, you know, you're not good enough, you know, you can't fight City Hall, you can't, you know, you can't, always about limits. And I think it beats people down, and I think people, you know, they're busy trying to make a living, they're busy trying to raise their kids, they're busy trying to have the best life they can have, and it's just really hard to take the time to really work on yourself and really try to make that change. And it's easy to fall into kind of this tribal thing, you know, where, well, I'm looking around and everyone else seems to be upset about this and negative and whatever. Then I think people just kind of fall into it by default, because you really have to swim upstream a little bit, I think, to stay positive. And I think everyone's capable of that. I just think everyone isn't always willing to do that. So
it's a lot of work, you know. It's a lot of work navigating that and holding true to your beliefs and putting them out there publicly, knowing people are going to give me a hard time about this because it goes against the status quo. It's definitely tough, you know. And I've noticed for me, when I started really questioning my beliefs and finding answers that counteracted a lot of the things that I believed, that was devastating for me. I mean, I went through a major life change. I went through a depression, you know, several times, because it seems like, oh, I figured it out. Oh, no, I don't know anything. Oh, I figured it out. I don't know anything. You know, and there's these highs and lows, and in between that, sometimes there's this, like, just a depression that comes on, because it's an overwhelming concept. You know, like they say in the Matrix, we usually don't free a mind beyond a certain age because they have trouble letting go, and I felt like that throughout my life sometimes. So I guess I can understand people's reservation with the negativity, and then the fear-based of, well, that's not true, so now what do I turn to when when I need guidance or whatever? So it's definitely an intimidating thing.
Well, you have institutions, and not to be, you know, I mean, you have institutions that are literally holding your eternal soul or jail or you know, various things over you, you know, if you don't fall in line, you know. And I think it's really hard, you know, unless you really make an effort to get outside of that. It's really hard not to kind of fall into that swift-moving stream and just move on down the river with everybody, you know, because it's, you know, there's a big fear factor there. What happens if
I'm wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and yeah, I was told you're going to go. I used to confess my sins every night for thoughts I would have, because I was so afraid I was going to be condemned to hell. And when I finally moved past that, it was a liberating feeling. I think Joel was trying to chime in with something. Did I hear you in the background, Joel?
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the things that I gleaned from, like, evolutionary biology studying it was, if someone believes that, I tend to believe there's at least a shred of truth to it, is this idea that primate ancestors were existing in these jungles and in trees, and when like one of the things that helped them survive was they were able to they thought visually and spatially, so they could like survey like a panorama of their environment, and they could like see predators and see food. Now we tend to like think about abstract ideas in the same way, but abstract ideas often, like, we tend to often think in black and white. We'll think of either that's either predator or prey. That's either food or something's going to eat us. So the way that our brains are wired to organized phenomenon as we perceive them in the exterior world sometimes doesn't do us a great service when we're trying to talk about abstract ideas. And I've struggled with my whole life trying to like actually put things into words and not fall into this either I'm right and you're wrong type thinking, or it's either this or it's that, to like see nuance, to see shade, to see degrees of things.
It's a good point, Joel.
Excellent point.
Let me move this in a different direction if I can. I want to get back to your book, Ray. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this story and this journey, to potential readers out there?
Sure. Well, I don't want to scare people off who just, aren't interested in, ancient aliens or UFOs or that kind of thing, to think this book isn't interesting. I had quite a few beta readers of various backgrounds read this when I was writing the book, and really it's a story about a woman, a human being, who Maria Lev, who happens to be a White House correspondent, and she's 39 years old, and she's got the perfect life according to everything that society says she should have, and yet she feels like something's missing. And so she kind of, being in the modern age, and this is, by the way, set 10 years in the future, so she goes on Twitter and she is just kind of asking what's the meaning of life, and kind of getting the kind of responses you would get if you or I went on Twitter right now and asked a question like that, all over the board.
Lori asked that, by the way. Go ahead. We're just going to get Lori to see if she gets responses on that, but go on with your story.
And so this one woman, writes her back and says, do you really want to know the answers? And she's like, well, yeah, I wouldn't be asking if I didn't want to know. So she happens to be in Hawaii at the time. Writers always draw from things they love. So she spends a little bit of time at the beginning of the book in Hawaii. So she goes and meets her in Honolulu, and this woman's very unusual, and kind of starts quizzing Marie and seems to know a lot about her and her life, and stuff about when she was born, and stuff about her whole life and her where she went to school and what she did and all this sort of thing. And basically she's quizzing her, saying, do you really want to know the answers? Because it's dangerous to ask these questions. If you're not willing to commit yourself to really going and finding the truth on this, then I'm not going to go down this path with you. So they kind of start off on this journey. Marie is very skeptical at first. She has some baggage in her life related to religion and God, and in fact she goes on kind of a rant in that first conversation, kind of laying out what I just talked about a minute ago about religion and science, kind of offering these twin versions of reality that have parts of the truth but don't really seem to explain the whole truth, and she kind of gets into that. So she goes on this journey with this woman who turns out to be one of the Anunnaki, one of the ancient Anunnaki, and basically this woman is trying to undo this kind of colossal cosmic ancient wrong that's been done to humanity, where we were genetically engineered by them. We were kind of asked to worship them as gods, and then it kind of turned into more of a financial arrangement where they left and put a group that's in the book called the Cadre in charge, and the Cadre basically runs planet Earth for them. And it kind of gets into all this as you go through the book, but basically this woman's trying to undo this, so she's kind of working against her own people to change this historic wrong.
And stand up for humanity, basically.
Stand up for humanity so that they can be freed, so they can know their past, so that they can move forward to their true destiny.
That's a common theme in a lot of, I'd say, things that you see in some fictional movies and in some religious texts. I know Michael Tessarian, I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, but he does some talk about the fall and the Atlantis, which is a similar story to Sitchin's story. And even Robert Morningsky has a similar story about that too. It's a fascinating subject. That basically there was a sect that rebelled. Sounds like the fallen angels, right? That rebelled against God and said, "Hey, we're going to stand up for mankind and not let you keep doing what you're doing to them." Is basically the concept.
Well, not to give too much away, but there's a little twist in the book that kind of turns some things maybe in some of the current religions and religious books on their head just a little bit, and that this idea that the ones who were trying to give humanity information were the bad ones, and the ones who were trying to withhold it were the good ones. Let's just say that the book calls that into question a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. I look forward to get it, because that's something. Ray, I go back and forth on that because you hear different perspectives on that whole situation with the garden and the fall and who's
the
helping.
tree of knowledge.
Right,
good and evil,
and the snake, was the snake? Because I've read a lot that says the snake or the serpent was liberating man, was giving knowledge to man, and other people say, well, no, that's Satan helping man fall, and so I mean, it goes back and forth depending on who you're reading and what research you're going through. So
it does, and it's interesting that Enki, who was one of the Anunnaki, or one of the Sumerian gods, that's another name for them. People who aren't familiar with this, the Anunnaki are basically, according to the writings of Zechariah Sitchin and others, they're the Sumerian gods. So they're, Enki and Enlil and Anu and Inanna, and it goes on and on and on for the whole pantheon. And interestingly enough, if you really look into this, you'll see that those same gods that were in the Sumerian culture really have mirrors in Egypt and Greece and all these other cultures that came across. It's really very often the same personality gods, just with a different name.
Yeah.
And so so that's kind of who the Anunnaki are. Sitchin claims that the name Anunnaki basically was those who from heaven to earth came, and there's a lot of dispute about that. There's a scholar now who is a Sumerian scholar who claims that Sitchin's translations of this were all wrong, and I guess I would say to that, whether or not Sitchin, I don't really base my thoughts on just Sitchin. I mean, I think he's a good starting point, but I think there's tons of evidence around the planet that points to the fact that something was going on in ancient times, that doesn't match up with people who had, copper hammers and.
Right. Well, Sumeria just came out of nowhere. It just sprung into existence with laws, with towers and civilization. So you got to ask, where did that come from? Where did the man all of a sudden say, "Hey, I have all these ideas"? I think that would be a more gradual process.
And as did we. I mean, even if you really get into the evolutionary biology, and they kind of steer away from this, but. Modern humans seem to have appeared rather suddenly. In fact, you'll even see references to that. But it appears that we really grew up very quickly and became something different. And if you think about it, if we obviously have a lot of commonalities with the other primates, but we also got the 98-pound weakling gene, we got the bald gene, we got the super intelligence gene, and it all points to maybe that there was something. That happened that kind of sped up the process. That's where I kind of say I don't, disallow or even disagree with the fact that evolution may have occurred, or that, all of this might have been started by some being that kind of is behind the whole scenes. But if we're just talking about the human story, we're really talking about a situation where something happened very suddenly. And we can look even in the Bible, even in Genesis, and it talks about how they made, Adam and Eve, and they put Adam, it kind of sounds like an operation, right? He was put to sleep, and his rib was taken out, and that created Eve. And if you go back to the Sumerians, you really get a much fuller story of that whole thing, about why they made human beings and that whole thing. And it kind of gets to what Joel was saying earlier about this idea of this battle between that negative self and that positive self. And I wonder sometimes if we're kind of if we are indeed a mix of the gods and primates that were on this planet, if there was some sort of a genetic mix that happened that created us, then we're kind of battling two sides of ourselves. We're kind of battling this animal side of us, kind of the amygdala, our lower animal brain or reptilian brain, we call it sometimes, versus almost this
higher self.
This higher self that's also part of us now. And we're kind of trying to emerge from that other thing. I think we're kind of torn because we are a mix, in my opinion.
Well, there's also really amazing things like your amygdala also helps you have empathy, and like animals can have tremendous empathy, and then there can be cold calculation. The higher self always isn't higher. Like the part of our brain that is purely rational, if it gets divorced from that amygdala, sometimes we'll just do things based on utility. We'll use people we'll look at them as like cogs in a machine. So I think that there's good parts of both sides. That sometimes we can break it down to too much of a duality between like the higher human faculties and then the lower base animal faculties. And I think there's good aspects of both.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, if we are a combination of both, if you think about, we were talking earlier too about, this idea of these gods in a lot of cases being angry, kind of demanding, tribute of one kind or another, kind of wanting our worship and that kind of thing. It's clear that the beings that are described in these stories are very egoic and very not necessarily that much more highly spiritually evolved than we are, and so they're still battling that, and so obviously I think we are too. So I think I agree with you. I don't think that higher side is necessarily a panacea if we could reach that and escape our other side. But I do think there's these two elements of us that are kind of an interesting mix, and I think really cause a lot of angst for us.
Ray, it's interesting because a lot of some of the writers out there and some of the speakers have talked about these gods or these beings that manipulated mankind. In order to get the desired result, they had to give a part of themselves. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Robert Morningsky. I referenced him a little bit ago. Have you heard some of his stuff?
I've studied a lot and heard a lot, but I have not heard his stuff. No.
He wrote the Terra Papers, and he does it's a tough video to find. I have it on one of my YouTube channels. I'll try to post it for you. But he does. It's like a 3 or 4 hour presentation of. It's very similar to the Sitchin story, but he's a Native American man who talks about a crash that happened back like 40s or 50s. His grandfather was present, and they were given this knowledge and this information, and then he started doing some research, and it brings you back to Sumeria. But he tells this story, and the way he traces the origin of the names from basically Native American tongue through into Egypt, Sumeria, Greek, all the way up. I mean, it's just it blows your minds showing the connections. But his story, Sitchin's story, Robert Monroe has an experience that he talks about in his research where these gods took a part of themselves and put it into mankind. And some people say that might explain part of the reptilian brain. It might explain the soul. Why do you think, if that's true, why did they create us, and why did they do it in that fashion? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, so I'm going to separate this from what's in the book a little bit. This is my personal thought on this, although some of it is in the book too. But I think there may be something to what Sitchin was onto, that they came here for some reason, and he cites the whole gold thing that they needed gold to repair their atmosphere or something like that, and that there was rebellion among their own, and that they came up with this idea of engineering this lesser being basically to do the hard work basically. And I think there may be something to that, and then at some point it seems like they went away and kind of left us to our own devices.
Right.
Now I theorize in the book that maybe they still, through maybe some of the institutions on our planet, may still have some control that they exercise, but and again, these are all theories. I don't have any evidence that says that's absolutely what happened. I mean, these are just ideas. But I think I think that's kind of what I basically kind of agree with that scenario, that basically they came here for some purpose. They created us for maybe a short-term reason, and then we have been maybe kind of an ongoing problem, for lack of a better word, for them. They made the mess, and the book talks about this a little bit, because we get into, I kind of make this very multi-level, because we have these beings that we've kind of directed our worship to that we call the gods, and then there's what they call the Father Creator.
Mm-hmm.
And Maria interacts with him in this book a little bit, and basically he is working with Anana to kind of clean up this mess, because he wants, the Father Creator wants humanity to understand their true place in the universe, and that can't happen as long as this, long-standing lie is still in place. And so that's really what they're trying to undo and bring that transparency to humanity so that they can see the past and move forward is kind of the story in the book.
And I think that's... Go ahead, Joel. Go ahead.
I was going to say, just to, I'm incredibly skeptical of the idea that aliens came, but at the same time, there's something interesting that goes on in some of the religious texts. Like, if you look at the Old Testament, if you look at the laws, there's pages and pages of laws in Deuteronomy and Leviticus that have to do with cleanliness, and they have to do with, a lot of it's ritual, like preparing rituals for the sacrificial things they did and all that. But a lot of it had to do with like women when they were menstruating and blood and who should have sex with whom. And it's just like these pages and pages of laws. And if you actually were just to follow them, you would probably have a society that was very clean and avoided germs and avoided bad genetic outcomes from inbreeding. You would be combating germs, which they had no idea what they were.
Yeah.
You'd be combating germs incredibly effectively. So it's almost like somehow they got some secondhand information, but they didn't quite understand why. But they were like, that blood over there, that could transfer something evil. And this is in mainstream. I read this in mainstream psychological texts, anthropological texts when I was in college about how early societies tended to equate something that was dirty with something that was evil. And what's interesting there is that a virus or a bacteria, if it comes through your little tribe or your little area and it starts killing everybody, you don't know, it's invisible, it's microscopic, it looks like it's an evil spirit. So it's like,
right.
No wonder they equated the two, and they didn't have any modern science, so they were like, cast out the demon, they had a variety of rituals, but it points to some kind of other knowledge. And the other thing, real quick, because I don't want to take up too much time, but I am really incredibly compelled by the story of Jesus. And one of the things that compelled me about Jesus was that his ethical teachings were so outside. Now, some people disagree with this, but my personal understanding of the history, the cultural practices and the moral practices of the societies around Jesus' time, we look at what he said and we're like, because we've inherited that ethical tradition, we're like, yeah, you shouldn't kill people, and killing is wrong, and life is worth something. But those people, most societies back then didn't look at it like that. And so something about him, too, was he's an out-of-place figure. Either he was a
revolutionary.
Yeah, but his morality was so different than the morality of most of the people at the time. It would lead me to believe, perhaps, that he got his hands on some kind of knowledge from somewhere else, too. So these are just some observations I've made that give some credence to at least exploring some of the issues that, you're exploring, Ray.
Mm-hmm. And you get into some of the Vedic stuff where Brahmins were, asked as part of their training to memorize numbers that made no sense until the computer age, really. I mean, not to the 88th decibel or decimal or that sort of thing. I mean, that you're just wondering why they did. I will say this because I don't mean this to turn into a religious discussion at all necessarily, but I think as I studied these things, there really are two figures that really stand out as individuals that seem to have really transformed not only their own societies, but I think broader societies around the world in a way, and still do today. And and Jesus is one of those figures, and I think Buddha is the other one. I mean,
absolutely.
He also seemed to really transcend the knowledge and the culture of his time, and try to bring people to a higher understanding. I think he and Jesus really share that accomplishment, and to this day, I think people still look at those. Now, what happened with the ideas sometimes after that?
Are different, absolutely.
Are different than what that they taught, in my opinion. But
we can regress and degenerate and devolve. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Buddha, he cut through all like the unnecessary ritual and really got to the heart of the matter of trying to help people like avoid suffering and become, more compassionate beings. Whereas there was all these cultural practices that were, like you said, that you used the word provincial in talking about your background. There was lots of provincial, like Hindu practices that he was like, you know what, you don't need that. Like we really got to look at like what is the self, like what is the person in relation to the rest of the world, like where does suffering emerge from. He was just like, let's cut all the BS extra stuff out and really get to the crux of like why do we suffer and how can we avoid suffering. And like, yeah, so advanced. But I don't want to take this conversation.
No, those are all good points. I mean, we said earlier, Joel, every time we do a show, we hear all these different points. It's like, ooh, I want to talk about that. Ooh, I want to talk about that. You guys just said 50 things where I want to go on a tangent. Ray, we're gonna have to have you on another night to explore some of this stuff in even greater detail. But let's jump back to your book again, and it's hard for me to step away from some of this stuff because it's one of my favorite subjects. But your book is equally as interesting, and I want to talk about your cover first of all. It's a beautiful cover. Can you explain that? Who designed the cover, and explain what we're seeing on there? Because there's a lot of stuff that I think is more than just a pretty picture on there, if I'm not mistaken.
So my publisher is in Hawaii, and he hired an artist. I gave him an idea of something I found on the internet, and he took it and redid it, and came up. So basically, that is Inanna on the cover. So that's the woman. She's the Sumerian goddess that is helping Maria in the story. And if you look at her crown, it's the planets, and then her earrings are the sun and the moon, basically. Yeah. And that all represents. She was called by the Sumerians the Queen of Heaven and Earth, and that kind of is meant to represent that. And of course, she's overlooking the Earth, kind of a orbital picture of the Earth, basically. Right. And we played with a number of different covers. I thought about having Maria on there too, but when I saw that, I was like, that's it. That really just if
knew.
You look at it, just kind of draws you in.
Yeah, it's a captivating cover. Let me look at our slideshow here. There it is, right there. For those watching on YouTube and Google, you can see the picture right there. It's a beautiful picture, man, and it really catches your attention and makes you, whether you're familiar with this subject, if you are, then all those thoughts start going through your head, and if not, it makes me want to know more. I mean, it really does. So I think that's a beautiful cover. Now,
yeah, that's very cool.
When I read, like I said, just read the first chapter, but it was such an easy read going through it. It caught my attention the whole time. It's excitement right from the beginning. Did you have a lot of fun writing this? I mean, what was the process like for you? How long did it take you to write, and what was your enjoyment level like?
It was a lot of fun. It's kind of weird. This story came to me. Like I said, I started out to write a different book. I was going to write a motivational book about the human future and about what I thought we could achieve, and I kind of mixed in these ideas. And then really the characters of Maria and Inanna, I almost would say they kind of appeared like my muse. And kind of their interaction kind of really wrote the story. But the idea at the beginning, there's a lot of, in writing circles, kind of a disagreement on whether or not you should do kind of a prologue, and that chapter is kind of a prologue, but it really gets you into the story very quickly, and it sets up kind of a mystery that isn't really solved until later in the book. So it also, and Dennis, with your military background, I think you might find some of the characters, two of them really, that kind of continue through parts or most of the book from that operation, and kind of what happens to them after the fact is kind of there's a lot of little sub stories in this book.
That's exciting.
It's kind of social commentary in some cases, or that kind of thing. But what I really wanted to achieve is, we do have these very strong feelings and arguments in our society about these topics, and it's very emotional for people. And you see the creation versus evolution debate, and you see people getting very angry and worked up, and there's kind of a character, at least one, kind of on all sides of these arguments in this book. So you kind of see this cultural dialogue we're having about this, and there's kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod to the reader, because while they're arguing about whether or not this could be true or not, there's stuff that's going on where the reader knows it really is true.
Right.
And so
Right.
it's kind of fascinating, I think.
You know, I can't wait to get into this. You know, and you mentioned the mystery at the end of the first chapter that carries on. I got to the end of the first chapter, and I won't even say what the mystery is, but it was one of those, I wish I had time to keep reading this because I want to find out about that thing you were talking about, you know. So you definitely caught my attention with it. That's definitely good writing. Like I said, when I read through it, I could just tell you had a good time writing this story and sharing, you know, it sounds like your life's work in a way that's, I think, fun to read, and hopefully, like I said, it'll generate some discussion among people. Is this true? Is it not true? You know, what are people's thoughts on it? And if you're out there listening, you know, please let us know. You know, you can reach out to Ray. Ray, you want to give your contact information? We're coming up on the end of our show anyway. How can people reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach me. I'm on Facebook. You can look me up under Anunnaki Awakening. I'm also on Twitter. My handle is @AnunnakiAwake. And then my website is ray-davis.com, and you can contact me through that as well.
Yeah, and definitely you can reach out to us as well at the Changecast. Dennis Nappy II, Nappii. That's my Twitter handle. Facebook.com/Service of Change, and then the same thing, Dennis Nappy at gmail.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts on tonight's show, on your personal experiences, on what you think about Ray's book, anything. We want to get this discussion going. I want to hear more from our listeners out there. I see we have a couple viewers that are popping in and out of the show tonight, so thank you for your attention and your participation. Ray, we're coming up on our final thoughts for the show. I'll leave the floor to you if there's anything else you want to say to our listeners out there.
Well, you know, just this. This book is a work of fiction, and it really is designed, as Dennis said, to get dialogue going. It's not designed to attack anyone's opinions or beliefs or whatever. They're really, you know, I really feel like it's just important for us to really look at these things honestly and have a dialogue about what, you know, happened in our past, because we don't really have all the pieces, and we may never have all the pieces, but I think this book is a fun way to kind of explore those ideas, and I hope people will find it both, you know, entertaining, and it's kind of a page turner, is what I've heard from the beta readers. So, so it's a fun story. I think even if you're not really into this, if this really isn't your cup of tea, then you could still enjoy the book. But I think if you're really into this kind of stuff, I hope it will spark some, you know, new thoughts, new ideas, and new desire to go and inquire more about these sorts of things.
Well said, Ray. I think it's definitely a great, fun. It looks like it's going to be a really fun read. If you're just looking for some summer reading or some weekend reading, whether you're into it or not, like Ray said, I think whoever picks this book up won't be disappointed. Actually, you'll be disappointed when you finish reading, because you'll be all done with it and you'll be missing your book.
Well, this is the first of a trilogy, so.
Wow,
Oh,
there you
nice.
go. Perfect segue for that. See, I didn't even know that. So excellent. So there will be more to come from Ray, and like I said, Ray, I enjoyed having you on the show, so I can hope we can have you back. Joel, any final thoughts before I go ahead and close out the show?
I just like the idea that either these types of ideas have to be literally true or they're entirely false, I think is kind of a false dichotomy, because I think Ray mentioned like his initial exploration into a lot of this stuff came with Joseph Campbell and talking about mythologies. And I was just like thinking about like people that we know from our own history, like Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King or Gandhi. Like you can go and do searches and you can find people who hate Gandhi, who hate Martin Luther King, who hate Abraham Lincoln, and you can find people who the typical like response to these three historical figures is love. And reality is that they're all those things. So when we talk about these archetypes and these mythological figures, like I don't think it's necessarily important in the beginning and the outset to like decide, well, there were Anunnaki or there weren't Anunnaki. That I think that you can engage in these questions without having to decide that firsthand. And so I think that's an invitation to dialogue about these things and not necessarily have to come to those conclusions immediately.
Well said, Joel. Good stuff. We're just about out of time on our show, so I want to say thank you to Joel and to Ray for being on the show tonight, and to Lori for her fabulous support through Twitter and the social media feeds. Check out Ray's book, Anunnaki Awakening. His links will be available on the podcast link affiliated with this to get his book. I highly recommend it. Please, tomorrow my new book comes out, I Am Human and We Are Not Who We Think We Are. You can read it for free. Just go to serviceofchange.com/IamHuman and sign up for my, again, free newsletter. It's a quick read, but I hope it inspires some thoughts and some questions and some feedback from you. That is all the time we had this evening with this Changecast. I'm Dennis Snappy II. Thank you so much for your support. Please continue to like and share our stuff. Get us on iTunes, get us on Facebook, get us through RSS. There's a lot of ways you can get us out on YouTube. And remember that small changes among the masses can have a massive impact around the world. Be that change. Thank you.